On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks will be without Trae Young for at least the next 4 weeks after a torn ligament in his left pinky. How will the Hawks navigate this next month? Should they try and stay competitive, or does it make more sense to bottom out and try and secure a top draft pick? Plus, the Trae Young versus Dejounte Murray debate continues on. Is this an opportunity for Dejounte Murray to prove that he should be the guard that stays in Atlanta if the Hawks decide to move on from Trae Young? It's all coming up right here at Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Grammarly. No matter what kind of work you do, how you communicate is absolutely key. All those emails, reports, and presentations are equally important to the collaboration needed to get things done. And Grammarly can help you do just that. Grammarly is your AI writing partner to help you communicate more effectively and efficiently so you can make a bigger impact at work. Grammarly helps professionals get more done. Save time with one click and go from editing drafts in hours to mere seconds. 93% of professionals using Grammarly's premium report that it helps them get more work done faster. Grammarly works across 500,000 different apps and websites. By understanding your writing and context, Grammarly provides relevant, personalized suggestions. Make a bigger impact at work with Grammarly. Sign up and download today for free at Grammarly.com/podcast. That's Grammarly.com/podcast. Grammarly.com/podcast. Easier said, done. Joining us now is the host of Locked On Hawks, Brad Rowland, who you can track down wherever you listen to your podcasts and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Hawks. And Brad, some rough news for the Atlanta Hawks, losing Trae Young for at least 4 weeks due to a torn ligament in his left pinky, set to have surgery this upcoming Tuesday. What does losing Trae mean for Atlanta, currently sitting at 25-32, 10th in the Eastern Conference, with Brooklyn just a few games behind them in the standings for that final play-in spot?
Yeah, it's this very odd situation where they're kind of in purgatory, right? You know, they're the 10 seed, and they might be able to hold it without him because the teams below them are not terribly exciting. But do you want to hold the 10 seed? That's one of those logical questions. Without Trae Young, they're not the same team. And he certainly, you know, his absence, they actually managed to win the game right after it was announced. That was probably helpful for them. But big picture, it's like, how do you want to approach the last third of the season is a question that I think everyone around Atlanta is asking. I don't have the greatest answer for you. I think they're going to try to still win. You won't see the tank roll down the street in Atlanta just yet. But they're not the same team without him, for sure. Their offense in particular.
So, I mean, at that point, then that is one of those big question marks, right? When you see a team lose its best player, its key piece, it becomes a question, especially at this point in the NBA season. If you're not, you know, a top 4 seed, top 6 seed, whatever, you have that question presented to you. Do you kind of soft tank, right? Do you bottom out, maybe accrue an asset to make the team better next season, to you know, add some support in the offseason, whatever? Is it a mistake if Atlanta doesn't choose to bottom out the rest of the season? What can this team gain by trying to stay competitive?
Yeah, I think that because they have their own pick, which is certainly something to keep in mind here. I think it would kind of be difficult for them to, at least more difficult than people want to imagine it to be, for them to actually get to where they have to get to make it worth it. Does that make sense? Because they're still 3.5, 4 games ahead of where they have to be to fall out of the play-in. And with 25 games left, that's not a non-zero thing. Like it's almost difficult to be as bad as they'd have to be to guarantee them getting out of the play-in, even like beyond till, you know, down to the 12, 13 seed in the Eastern Conference. To this point, there's been no indication that the Hawks are going to do that. The way that I've been framing it is that if it was me, I would be not necessarily tanking, but I'd be prioritizing the future. That means not shutting guys down, because I think they're not going to do that realistically, but playing your young guys, playing Kobe Buffkin, their rookie, their first round pick from this last year, trying to rekindle AJ Griffin, who was their first round pick 2 years ago, who's kind of been just lost this season for the most part. While still, you know, they still have enough talent to win games. We even saw on Sunday night. I think organizationally, they're just not ready to embrace it, whether they should or not. But I do think that if you get down to like late March, if it's close, then like at the very end of the year, it's probably an easier sell to your veterans, to your team, to be like, hey guys, let's go ahead and do this. Whereas right now in late February, they have reason to believe that if they actually try, they're still going to be in the play-in. And I think if I had to guess right now, if they were to play hard the rest of the year, they're probably going to be in the play-in. And it's hard to like look yourself in the eye and be like, do we really not want to do this as of February? Like the Mavs last year, they did it at the very end of the year, but they had a very obvious incentive. The Hawks don't really have that incentive. They have their own pick, but it's not protected. They're not going to lose it if they make the playoffs. So it's this really kind of dicey terrain.
Hey, I just want to point out anything's possible when you have tank commander Garrison Matthews on your roster. Shout out to his time with the Houston Rockets. No, I kid. But what I do want to get into here, and I find this so curious, is right around the trade deadline and the immediate aftermath of the trade deadline, there was all this buzz about potentially moving on from Dejounte Murray. And then we start getting the reporting from Mark Stein that there's, the decision to keep Dejounte Murray kind of bleeds into this confusion about the future and kind of the future being uncertain in Atlanta about whether maybe moving on from Trae Young is potentially the move a little bit further down the line, because there's now kind of this market being generated for Trae Young. And maybe if you can create a bit of a bidding war, maybe it makes more sense to hold on to Dejounte Murray instead of holding on to Trae Young and then moving him in this offseason. So what does this... Is this window without Trae almost kind of an audition, an opportunity for Dejounte to show that he should be the guard that they hold on to, once the offseason actually gets here?
I know why that looks that way. I kind of don't think so.
Okay.
I understand that maybe it is. I mean, listen, if they go on a run here, I don't foresee that happening. But if they were to get hot and win a bunch of games, sure, it might be a selling point for Murray. I do think that he's in general more comfortable playing as the guy. Dating back to San Antonio, I think if you watch him play, like it's like the light comes on when he's asked to be, or like he knows he's got to have to be the guy who's the number one. That happened tonight in the game they played against the Magic. He was better in that role. I think he likes that role, and I think he'll embrace it. But I also don't think that he's. And I want to be delicate about this. Like, he's a good player. He's not as good as Trae Young at that. Like, he's not as good of an offensive player as Trae Young. He's just not. So. Yeah, is there a school of thought out there that I hear from people like, hey, if you traded Trae, you get so much stuff. You can turn around and build around Dejounte and Jalen Johnson. I get that. I've still never, I understand the Ryder reporting that you're talking about with Mark Stein and those guys. It's all kind of rival executives. It's never come from Atlanta that I have heard that they're really even looking at it. Look, if something happens and they want to do that, I personally think it would be a better idea to kind of just go into a full rebuild if you're going to trade Trae Young. Like, I don't think that building around Dejounte Murray and Jalen Johnson is going to get you anywhere, personally. And that's not a shot at either one of those guys. I think Jalen Johnson in particular has super high upside, and Dejounte is a fringe all-star kind of guy, but he certainly has gotten there in the past. It's just that if those are your best two players, what are you doing? Basically, it would be my question. And I guess the counter might be that with Trae Young, they've been in the play-in 3 years in a row. So. What are you going to do? At least with Trae Young, they were the conference finals 3 years ago.
I was about to say, but they've also, when you look at the ceiling of where they've been with Trae Young, right? They made it to the conference finals. What has Dejounte Murray done in his career as the guy, quote unquote? But I look at the situation, Brad, and it screams. The similarities are so close to what the Sacramento Kings went through recently with the De'Aaron Fox, Tyrese Haliburton situation, where I think maybe when the trade occurred, you could maybe make an argument that Tyrese and De'Aaron Fox were kind of more so on the same level. I think now you look at them clearly, and I think you probably put Tyrese Haliburton a tier above De'Aaron Fox, or maybe not a whole tier, whatever. I think he's ahead of De'Aaron Fox.
Yeah.
So he was the better player between the two. And that was a whole, situation where the Kings were trying to maybe deal De'Aaron Fox. There wasn't really a market for him. There was a market for Tyrese Haliburton. So you come out of that trade, and I think both sides are still pretty content with where they are, because the Kings are, a playoff threat now. They look really good. Domantas Sabonis was a huge addition for them. Do you see like similarities here with Trae Young and Dejounte Murray? And is there a world where, again, if the Hawks do choose to entertain it, right, rather than bottoming out, rather than committing to a full rebuild, is there a world where you could get enough back for Trae Young, where you've got Dejounte Murray, Jalen Johnson, maybe adding one more key piece that you get for Trae, or a swath of draft picks or whatever, and then you can kind of reignite the team that way?
I can see the parallels a little bit because of the positions. Like you said, two guys who are really point guards playing together. It's kind of hard to do that. The difference that I think is fundamental that people outside of Atlanta don't really understand as much is that, Tyrese Haliburton was drafted alongside De'Aaron Fox. It was already De'Aaron Fox's team. You know what I mean? At least that was the theory of it all, You get into the situation where this has been Trae Young's team, and Trae Young is the first star. First real star that the Hawks have had in 30 years. And I'm not saying that's the greatest motivation to operate with, but in reality, when the team has been looking for a star for this long and they finally get one that can sell tickets and move the needle, and he took them to the conference finals. Like, it's hard to do that with a guy who's as established as he is, whereas Haliburton was still a super young player. And like you said, it worked out for the Kings. It worked out for both sides. It's a little bit different just because of the dynamics in play. Like, Murray's the one that came in later, whereas it was Trae's team. It's more like it'd be the opposite, if that makes sense. So I get the theory of it. I think that I just haven't heard the Hawks looking to do that, but I would at least understand it. I personally probably wouldn't do that given what I know and, my evaluation of Trae and Dejounte in the situation. But you could get a haul for Trae Young. So if you're convinced, and you're Atlanta, I'm speculating here, I'm not reporting. If they were convinced that they just wanted to change it, and you're like, okay, we could get maybe 1 or 2 picks for Dejounte Murray, or we can go get 4 or 5 for Trae Young. That becomes a little bit more reasonable, because I do think that Trae has considerably more, trade value than Dejounte does. And if you're the Hawks and you believe those guys are like anywhere close to the same player, which I don't personally, but if you did, then yeah, you're gonna get a lot more for Trae, and that might jumpstart you for the future.
How will the Hawks look over this next month or so without Trae Young in the lineup? What does the future hold for Atlanta in the Trae Young versus Dejounte Murray kind of debate? You're going to have us cover all of that and so much more over at Locked On Hawks. Brad, thanks for stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Thanks for having me.